Well, it's the country. It's not a football club. It's the country we're talking about here. We're not talking about a football club. That's the whole problem, Russell. It's not a football club. It's not a football for you Conservatives to kick around the bar between each other. People are struggling and suffering. It's not a football club. It's people's lives. And you've been playing football amongst yourselves with the country's interest. It's not right.
A police officer was jailed for sexually assaulting minors whilst on his job the other day. Russell, as leader of the local Conservative Party, would you agree that's institutionalised failure, as Adam said, because you've been in power for the past 13 years from the Conservative Party that's run the police force?
Well, we've had this debate, I think, in one of our previous discussions, and my position has always been very clear on that. I don't think you can blame everything on a Conservative government in respect of the culture of the police service and the people who it employs. I think the police service, like any other industry, is always likely to have people in it that are actually do some of the hideous crimes that you've just described. What I would think is particularly important in a service like the police service is that people's vetting process is thorough enough and people's individual backgrounds are scrutinised as far as is possible to help eliminate the prospects of people like that coming into positions of significant power. I don't think that's a failing of the government to do that. I think that's an employment issue.
So there's nothing else they can do?
Well, look, there's always things that we can do, and obviously a culture is important. I think government, through the judiciary, should be encouraging the sort of sentences that have been passed out, and we need to be critical of such situations. But I think it's utterly ridiculous to blame a Conservative government for the behaviour of a rogue policeman.
What do you think?
You can't blame the Conservative government for individual misconduct in public office. What you can blame them for is a lack of a public service reform agenda. It's not just the economy in this country that's in a mess. It's also the fact they do not have a vision or agenda for how are we going to meet the demographic challenges of the 21st century in terms of the ageing society, in terms of modern medicine, in terms of advancing technology with regard to the NHS. What are we going to do to meet the crime challenges that we face today? Knife crime going through the roof, people not feeling safe in their communities. They simply do not have an agenda for the reform of public services. So of course I don't blame them for the misconduct of individual officers. That would be totally wrong and ridiculous. But I do blame them for a lack of leadership in terms of public service reform. It's always been the case that you need to move forward, you need to look at modern needs. Yes, you need to make money available, and by the way, the cuts that policing has seen is pretty shocking. The number of police officers patrolling our community at any one time is an absolute disgrace, okay? But let's put that to one side. There is no vision for reforming our public services coming from the Conservative government. I regard that as a sign that they are running out of ideas, that they're running out of time. And let's be honest, there are some really, really difficult challenges. Why are young people being attracted to gang warfare on our streets? Why are they being attracted to knife crime? Why do we continue to have the level of drugs problems that we have in our society? Where are the new ideas? Where are the fresh ideas in terms of tackling some of these problems? And the police are often dealing with the end result of society's failures. If you have a complete collapse of drugs and alcohol services because the government hasn't invested in them, then you'll find large numbers of people on the streets, for a start, homeless people. You'll see people involved in crime to fuel their addiction, their drug habit, or whatever else. These things all fit together, and because they've run out of ideas, and because they don't really have a preventative agenda, everyone talks about the importance of preventing crises, preventing people's lives spiraling out of control, preventing crime, preventing illness in the context of the health service. The truth is, these days, the only thing that is dealt with in these public services is when you hit crisis point. The prevention agenda has completely gone out the window because of the combination of a lack of vision from the government and a lack of investment and resources going into the system.
I think public service reform, I think we can expect, I understand during the week, that there will be an NHS plan, which government will be supporting. So watch out for that. Ivan.
Bit late,
You'll be surprised. It's a bit late, but we have had 2 years of COVID. I know that's very convenient.
Well, I hope it changes GP access as well.
Well, that'd be the intention. And again, let's put into context, because it's fair that one of the 5 pledges that the Prime Minister wants to be judged on is waiting lists. And, there is some improvements. There's still a long way to go, but the direction of travel is encouraging. And hopefully, by the time the Prime Minister is asked to be judged by it, waiting lists should be back where they need to be. But there is a massive challenge. What isn't helping public service reform is the ridiculous level of strikes that are currently being undertaken, aren't we? A 5-day junior doctor strike is hardly going to do anything.
What about the rest of the points they mentioned, for example, the lack of police in Barry or the
Well, lack of police, over the past couple of years, the police numbers have increased. So, again, let's deal with facts. No, please. Let's deal with facts.
On the streets?
Of course it's on the street. Where else are they?
That's a very good question. That's a really good question, Russell. Where are they?
There's probably over
That's a great question. Where are they?
Well, JMP have now close to another 1,000 police officers than they had in 2019 through direct recruitment to, don't take your head out of it, it's a fact. You can change it as much as you want, but deal with facts. There has been a very, very clear political decision made by the Mayor in consultation with the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester to drastically reduce the numbers of things that Ivan's government were responsible, David Blunkett, in PCSOs. A direct political decision has been made in Greater Manchester to reduce the numbers of PCSOs. People who I'm sure Ivan was saying, and he might not be saying this now, were actually out in the community helping people to deliver community-based policing. So, so some of the tools that we're now seeing, particularly in a Greater Manchester context, are there. It is up to the direction of a Chief Constable who has the political independence from things to direct his force in the best way he thinks is possible. Funding has increased in policing, as has numbers. So, this argument that is continually put about policing...
It's the public's argument, it's not mine, it's the public.
Well, the public need to understand that there's greater numbers of people in Greater Manchester than there was. Okay. And that's a fact.
The public are wrong, okay.
Well, it's not public wrong. The public are wrong because the facts are there, Ivan. The facts say that there is more police officers in Greater Manchester Police since 2019. So those are the facts.
So Russell talks about the country's riddled with strikes. He's right. You know what they've done through history? They've talked about industrial unrest in the country being a hallmark of having a Labour government. They always bring back memories of the winter of discontent, other eras where unions were on strike and the country was in crisis in decay. That's exactly what's happening under their government. When we left power in 2010, let's be clear, record low NHS waiting lists, a record low levels of crime. This wasn't just
no money no money
because there's been a global financial crash that hit America, hit Wall Street, and then affected us. And if Gordon Brown hadn't introduced a fiscal stimulus at that time, then we would have gone from recession to depression and been wrecked for generations, as ever most decent and fair-minded people in the world.
Let's not forget the note.
Russell now has to apologise for austerity. Because it's absolutely clear, austerity was a political project. It was absolutely nothing to do with the financial needs of the country. It was to do with the fact that they were trying to embarrass the Labour Party and somehow show that they were economically competent. As a result of that, they slashed and burned the infrastructure in this country. I'll give 2 examples. If you stop building and repairing hospitals and schools, it's private companies that build those hospitals and repair those schools. It's not the state. It's not statist organisations, it's private companies, often small and medium-sized enterprises employing local people. And that's what they did. They slashed them. They didn't say, we need to make some cuts somewhere. They would have been right, we did need to make some stuff. They slashed and burned without any regard for the consequences because it was a political project. And we're paying a very, very heavy price for the cumulative effects of that, of COVID, of Ukraine, of Liz Truss. As I say, I don't blame the Conservative Party for COVID. I don't blame them for Ukraine, but I do blame them for the self-inflicted harm and damage that they've applied to the country. And for Russell to say wait for an NHS plan that's due, did he say, on Wednesday? This is a party that's been in power since 2010, and he tells us we should wait for the new NHS reform plan due later in this week. It's absolutely scandalous that we've had to wait so long for a serious NHS reform plan. Absolutely scandalous.
It's quite ironic, isn't it, of all the things that I've enlisted about the Labour government when they left power.
Yeah.
The one he fails to acknowledge is the Liam Byrne note that said there was
That wasn't Labour's fault.
There was no, it's never Labour's fault.
It wasn't Labour's fault.
It's never
It wasn't Labour's.
It's quite ironic, isn't it? It's
global,
never Labour's fault.
Was it a global crash?
When these financial
was it a global crash?
But it is Conservatives' fault.
Was it a global
when we
crash?
have similar issues?
Was it a global crash?
There was no money.
Was it a global crash?
There was no money. Well, we could argue the same about COVID, and we could argue the same about Ukraine. What you're doing, and some of people on in the Labour Party say that's a Conservative fault. It's the same issues. You want to, in one hand, say we have no responsibility.
Liz Truss is responsible
for
wrecking the economy when she was in power for 2-3 weeks.
That's an overhead situation. We know it's an overhead situation.
You're responsible for a complete lack of investment in growth and jobs.
The
levelling up agenda has gone nowhere. You're responsible for failing in terms of growth in the economy.
Liz Truss
completely failed.
Liz Truss was 44 days. So let's keep it.
Thank God for that.
Let's keep it.
Thank God for that.
Let's keep it in context.
44 days was long enough.
Let's keep it in context. But it is quite ironic, I think, that it's Labour governments are never to blame. It's always Conservative governments. And I will stand by. I will stand by this issue about strikes because what the Labour Party,
chaos.
What the Labour, call it what you want. What the Labour Party would look to do to help settle.
No, but Ivan actually did say that you need to give the Conservative Party a fair amount of so because you did go through COVID, and he did say it's okay if they did go through some struggles.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that things that aren't helping. My point isn't what's helping public service. It is the level of strikes we have, and that's not helping the economy whatsoever. Some of the ridiculous wage demands that are being made, which we're led to believe a Labour government would capitulate to.
No, they never said that. They've never said that.
Russell,
that's a lie. What you just said is a lie.
Which would fuel inflation.
Russell, that's a lie. The Labour Party has never said they will capitulate to the wage demands that the unions are making now. So why lie?
Well, it's not a lie.
It's a lie. They've never said that.
Okay, we've never said that. I'm
right,
saying
thank you.
That we can all expect then the Labour solution would be to capitulate to a far greater level than the government are doing, which will in itself fuel greater levels of inflation. That is the sort of situation.
Inflation could be a much greater level.
Of course it can.
Extraordinary.
Of course it
it's
can.
Extraordinary. This guy. I mean, the level of inflation is caused this week. Interest rates to go up again and mortgage rates to go up again. Them having forecast, by the way, that their policies were being so successful that inflation would come down. The opposite state has happened. So how do we start throwing the Labour Party into this equation about increased inflation? It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre.
It's absolutely
the Labour Party's been nowhere near power in this country since 2010.
And we're all grateful, and let's hope that carries on.
Well, the British people will not be grateful when it comes to
I take a different view.
Okay, good luck, Russell.
We take a different view.
Good luck.
What about the point about that you've been in power for 13 years and you're only presenting a plan for NHS now?
Well, there's been various plans, hasn't there? And what we've got is, and it's been one of the main planks of the 2019 election. So it's taken a lot longer than any of us would have wanted to have done.
4 years?
Well, I know, it's very convenient to forget.
Well, after COVID.
But for 2 years, we were fighting COVID.
Immediately after COVID.
Yes.
They should have taken a step back and then come forward with a new plan for NHS. That's what should have happened.
And then we had the Ukraine. Look, we all would have wanted these plans to come. A lot of it. Nobody would deny this. Nobody would deny this whatsoever. But the fact of the matter is, we are where we are. And as Rishi Sunak is saying as Prime Minister, and his contract with the people will be the delivery of these things. And Ivan has a view of how the British people
feel at the moment.
Will feel. More significantly, it's how they'll feel come next October and November. That's the important time of how they feel, not necessarily how they feel today. I believe, and you can say it's me wanting to spin it as positively as I can. I still think that there is a lot of ground still to be gained between now and next October and November. And I don't believe, and I don't think anybody who's a serious Labour politician also believes that this general election is won, because it's far from
I genuinely believed 6 months ago that the election was still there for the taking for both parties, that it wasn't a done deal by any means. I really did believe that, and I thought some of my former colleagues in the Labour Party who thought the election was won, it was over, it was inevitable, were wrong. We're very complacent. What do I think now? I think the behaviour of that part of the current government over the last 6 months has been so shocking, and the British people have had enough. They are fed up. And good luck with the argument that they'll be able to go into the election and present Rishi Sunak as fresh, as change, as new. He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer under Boris Johnson. He couldn't even get the leadership when Boris Johnson was sacked by his own party. They chose Liz Truss instead of him. They didn't dare put Rishi Sunak to the members again, because they know full well the members would have voted for anybody other than Rishi Sunak, because they're so right-wing as a political party. So the truth is that there is one failure after another, and in the end, people ask themselves the question, am I and my family better off than we were 3 or 4 years ago as a result of a Conservative government? And I'm afraid to say the overwhelming verdict, as I say, whether it's people who are looking at their mortgages, whether it's people who are looking at their daily use of public services, they feel so anxious and insecure, but more to the point, disgusted that this country, this great country, is in a state of decay and decline. And if you add to that, by the way, nobody seems to be able to make the arguments in terms of what's happened as a consequence of Brexit. You know, at the end of the day, look, there was a poll done this week, 20% of those voted to leave regret having voted to leave. Now, I'm not saying we should go back into the European Union. I don't think that will happen, nor should it happen. But this is a perfect storm, one mess after the other mess. And not all of it is the responsibility of the government, but a substantial amount of it is. And that's why the Conservative Party brand is so badly tarnished and badly damaged. Listen, it's happened to the Labour Party in history, that as well. And once that happens, there is no way back for you. You can change your leader as much as you change your underwear, but it isn't going to change the fact that the British people look at the Conservative Party, they feel they've run out of ideas, they feel they are terribly divided, and they're completely out of touch with the concerns that people have in terms of their everyday lives.
I think that what we also want to quash is this view that changing party leaders, if you feel that they're not delivering
3 times.
Just let me finish, is wrong. Because if there was people in the Labour Party who had guts in 2015 and realised that Jeremy Corbyn was the person he undeniably was, and responded in the way that brave Conservatives...
There was a vote of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. There was a vote in
Russell,
there was a vote of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn, which I supported. As a consequence of that, I lost the mayoral nomination, the Labour nomination, because I voted against Corbyn in that vote of confidence. So you're rewriting history. There was a vote of no confidence led by the Parliamentary Labour Party to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, and we failed. And we lost the vote. We lost the vote.
That's fine. So the Conservatives didn't fail. What they were able to do is...
After 50 ministers resigned, Boris Johnson was sat in Downing Street refusing to leave his seat in his office until 50, an unprecedented moment in history, 50 government ministers had to resign before he smelt the coffee and left his position.
But he went. The end product is great having an echo. Good. The end product was Boris left Downing Street.
And then Liz Truss came along.
Liz Truss came along.
Yeah, and then Rishi Sunak.
I don't need to speak. He's speaking for me. We could be another lad. So yeah, and then the Conservative Party, after 44 days, decided that Liz Truss had to go.
Yeah.
So these, in some ways, can be argued as strength, because what is really important, what the Conservative Party...
So you decided to kick someone out when the Labour Party didn't.
Absolutely. You know, that's a position of strength. And what now the party... Twice if necessary, yeah. It's like a football match.
It's not the
it's the country. It's not a football club. It's the country we're talking about here. We're not talking about a football club. That's the whole problem, Russell. It's not a football club. It's not a football for you Conservatives to kick around the park between each other. People are struggling and suffering. It's not a football club. It's people's lives. And you've been playing football amongst yourselves with the country's interests. It's not right.
And these things are identified and changed.
It's not right, Russell.
And now we have a Prime Minister who the vast majority of the Parliamentary Party is supportive of, which is fact. Pardon?
Okay.
The vast majority, because there was only 7 Conservatives who actually voted. Everybody talks about people who abstained, but there was only 7 Conservatives who actually voted against the Partygate.
I'll come back on that in a minute.
So we have now got a Prime Minister who has the support of the vast majority of the Parliamentary Party. We have the Prime Minister who is rightly identified to the British people the 5 things that he will be judged on. The party membership, by and large, is absolutely supportive of the Prime Minister. So what we will have over this next 12 to 15 months, because let's be clear, we're not going to have a general election before October, November 2024, is the opportunities for the Conservative government under Rishi Sunak to say, those 5 objectives, which I said I will deliver for you, which are very, very important things, have I done it or have I failed? And if we do not bring down inflation, if waiting lists are not reduced, and if numbers of immigration are still high, then rightly, the British people will make a decision. And that decision could well be, let's hold our breath, and let's hope it doesn't happen, is a Labour government. But of course, that is the possibility, because we live in a democracy. But over this next 12 to 15 months, there is still plenty of opportunity to win over the British public. Because as I've said before, and I've said several times before, people out there are not in love with Labour.
So let me tell you what happened. They were so complacent about the fact that the Labour Party wasn't popular with these people. They played footsie. Russell talked about a football team. It's interesting, by the way, you can play as the management of a football team with the running of the country. That in itself tells you all you need to know about the Conservative Party. They played footsie internally with internal debates about Conservative ideology, Conservative difference of opinion, while the country was going to rot. That's what they did. And the reason they did that partially because they didn't take the Labour Party seriously. And you know what? They didn't take the British people seriously either. They thought they had a right to govern. Right? They have no right to govern. And the British people in the poll after poll after poll are telling them what they need to hear, which is a politician's job is to focus on the country, the people's issues, the people's concerns, whether it's mortgage rates, whether it's the NHS, whether it's rising crime, whether it's a concern that your kids and grandkids are going to have a worse future than you had. Whatever those concerns are, it's the job of the government of the country to focus on those things. And what they focused on over the last 18 months is internal politicking with their own party. They should be ashamed in terms of what they have done during that period. And it is a tragedy. Boris Johnson had a massive opportunity. He had a record victory in many ways. He had people voting for him, never voted for him before. The Labour Party was extremely in disarray post-Corbyn, and they threw it all away. But during the period they were throwing it away, they didn't take the British people seriously, and they didn't actually take the Labour Party very seriously either, which is why they thought they could get away with it. And I think what Rishi Sunak's problem is actually whether the British people do regard him as a strong leader. And I think one of the difficulties they have is they don't see him as a strong leader. They don't dislike him. They don't regard Rishi Sunak as somebody who is dislikable or somebody who has bad intentions. But they don't regard him as strong. And one of the great exemplifications of lack of strength was his failure to go and vote in Parliament last week for the Parliamentary Committee report into Boris Johnson. That is said all you needed to know. He was hiding, and the reason he was hiding was he wanted to keep the right of his party happy rather than do the right thing for the country. So it's not just a question of my opinion. It's a question of how the British people feel about the way the Conservative Party has behaved during the last 18 months. And it's been about focusing internally on their own divides, their own dramas, their own difficulties. It hasn't been focusing on the needs and the interests of the British people. And you cannot go to the public having done that and say, well, please forget all that period. That was an aberration. We're now focused on the needs of the people. And we've had only in the last week an example of this. They told us that as a result of the policies that they were pursuing, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, inflation would inevitably come down. And we saw the opposite happening last week. As a consequence of that, interest rates going up yet again and people's mortgage rates going up. So these are the things that matter. And as I say, it doesn't really matter to politicians in a studio like yours having this debate. Russell knows full well that the Tory party, in terms of the public's perception of them, is in terrible trouble. And if Russell and his colleagues had any sense, they would be focused on trying to do the right thing for the country on the basis that they can avoid, as a consequence of doing that, a landslide defeat at the next general election. If they fail to do that, they will not only won't win the next general election, they will actually lose by a landslide, because the British people should not be taken as fools.
Nobody takes the British people as fools, and let's be clear what the Prime Minister has said. The Prime Minister has said that inflation will be halved by the end of the year. We're only in June. So let's be clear, there's still 6 months to go on that. So the presentation that Ivan has of that inflation situation is wrong, because it is by the end of the year.
But people are hurting now. People are in terrible pain now.
We understand people are hurting now, and everybody acknowledges that people are hurting now, but we're in a painful situation, and government have tried to support the most vulnerable in the best way they can. But there is an inevitable some degree of difficulties, of challenges that need to be, until we can get inflation out of the system. One of the reasons why I mentioned the fact that not caving in to ridiculous wage demands from trade unions is fundamental in that.
Was caving in the NHS settlement we've seen, was that caving in, the one we've seen recently with the NHS?
Well, that seems to,
was that caving in by the Health Secretary?
Well,
or was it a pragmatic result for everyone?
1 million
the NHS workers settled, and there's no strike action.
Yeah, 1 million.
That's great, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
So he wasn't caving in, was he, the NHS Secretary of State?
1 million people.
Was that caving in?
Well, clearly not.
Exactly. It was a pragmatic agreement.
But that same pragmatism
Did he have
been offered to junior doctors
did he settle for considerably more than he started his negotiating point at the start?
Well, he got to a level of about 5-6%, which is pragmatic, which is on offer now.
That's right.
Which is on offer now, but the demands we're seeing are excess of that.
I agree, some of those demands are excessive.
I agree
some of those.
So a 5-day juniors doctor strike isn't going to do anything.
I agree with it.
Is it for
I agree with him, but what Russell can't answer is, when they talk about Labour governments through history, they talk about industrial unrest and carnage, right? They don't say Labour governments tried to reform the country and the unions didn't like it. That's why there were the disputes. The Labour Party wouldn't buckle to the trade unions. They don't say that. They say the country was riddled with industrial action and strike. We got that now under a Conservative government, and he doesn't want to accept there's any responsibility at all for the general carnage in the country as a consequence of the choices and the decisions the government has made.
What confuses me, Anthony, is what I don't quite understand. That analysis, however sound it might say.
Well, you do say it.
No.
So Labour governments always bring industrial unrest and strikes, don't you?
Is it 35% that junior doctors are asking for?
It's totally. Well, if they're asking
It's
for that,
such a madness.
they shouldn't get it. I mean,
Well, of course they shouldn't.
So we're agreed on that. So we're agreed on that.
But what was it? What was it
today?
Pardon?
Got on tip today.
Yeah. So what we're saying is this. Also, we're saying rail unions not wanting to. You talk about reform. Rail unions not wanting to reform. So what do? You have this standoff, don't you? You have this standoff, which.
So we've now established. I'm pleased.
Are we getting to politically driven?
I'm pleased.
strikes?
So we've now seen that strikes are not always as a consequence of bad government. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions as governments, and that's why people go on strike. So the next time the Tories try and use previous Labour governments where there were strikes to demonstrate that was an example of a country being chaos under a Labour government, I will remind Russell of what he said today. That's brilliant.
Well,
that's great.
If we ever get a Labour government in future, and if that ever happens,
I guess we've got a plan what's going to happen. Maybe what might happen again.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming over.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Thanks, Russell.